Hello, and welcome to Hammer and Vajra. Today we're going to discuss a topic that I intended to discuss around the Halloween spooky months, but I think there's always a good time to talk about fiction and or the fiction that has influenced us. So today's topic regarding H.P. Lovecraft and paganism will be a little bit late in coming out, but definitely one I wanted to take my time with and make sure that had proper attention. So in this topic today, we'll be discussing whether H.P. Lovecraft was a pagan, whether he was an atheist, or also the possibilities of his influences on his work, what they were, what they may be philosophically, spiritually, and or if they are even something relevant to anyone. H.P. Lovecraft is popular. His popularity always continues to rise, so I think it's always a good discussion. I will say off the bat, was H.P. Lovecraft an atheist? A lot of those who are atheists tend to love to tout that he was an atheist. I know that everyone who is of certain levels of Christian influence will say that he was some sort of Satanist or an atheist who was anti-Christian. And with that, I will say the majority of, and I stick to my standard in guns, this doesn't mean all, but the majority of those who are atheists or who tout atheism as a general religion, because it's basically a religion, has dogma, it has symbolism, it has general tenets that they follow, are reacting to Abrahamic religion and are more agnostic in nature. I will say with Lovecraft, while he had some openly atheistic statements, he was more or less agnostic in nature, leaning towards heavy paganism, and at a couple times in his life seems that he was pagan in his own descriptions of pagan. Though his definition of paganism, just like others' definition of Satanism, required one to reflect on those definitions in that times frame. Satanism being anything that the church doesn't agree with, regardless whether it was something that was actually occultic, demonic in nature, or something that was just not the typical worship that they intended for you to dogmatically follow. And then same thing with atheism. It most of the time just meant one did not believe in the set church values of the Abrahamic approach of atheism. So they didn't fall into the big three, which is even funny because amongst the big three, people who don't follow their sect, be it Christians looking at others or Muslims looking at others, they would define as atheist in their own way. So we'll start off by who was Howard Phillips Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft was born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1890 and lived until 1937. His father was institutionalized when he was young, and he lived on the wealth of the estate of his late grandfather. He lived with his mother until her institutionalization, and he wrote essays for the United Amateur Press Association. Later, he submitted small stories to many pulp fiction and cult magazines until he was picked up by Weird Tales. They were also known for Robert E. Howard's Conan series. He was an aristocrat, but wrote from the depths of his experience losing his parents, the asylums, seeing civilization fall apart during wars, and the Great Depression. His fiction and commentary was mostly underground, only taking off posthumously, where now he is regarded as one of the great American and Western authors. He is most well known for Call of Cthulhu. I find Lovecraft a fascinating author, as do many nowadays. In fact, his works and universe have become almost too mainstream nowadays, to the point where it has ruined some of the depth of lore and gripping fear within. While I don't fully agree with his view of the divine and cosmic fear, I think he was very much of a pagan mindset and maybe spirituality. His prolific influence reached everywhere from occult studies to media, games, art, music, horror literature, and psychology. I think the depths and intricacies of his interconnected lore and histories of his stories are great examples of how to write with nuance and flesh out a world. his cosmology set the standard. From the historicity of the settings of Innsmouth's New England plus Americana meets the Old World, to his frozen prehistoric connection to the outer world via the frozen mountains of madness, his settings give both a sense of chill and wonder. Much of his work that is adored and embraced within literature isn't just in the horror movie scene or by metal bands, but heavily in Japan, where everything from video games to manga continue to feel the call of Cthulhu. Many people ask the question, was Lovecraft pagan? To this I say, I think so, but we have to understand the context of his time. Pagan had begun to mean satanic to a small degree, but more so atheistic. I personally don't think he was an atheist, but he was rather against certain Abrahamic understandings. His view of the gods weren't always bad, as he had both good and bad gods, chaos and order gods. His gods in his writings were rather functional beings performing their cosmic duties, as they will, regardless of what human morality thought of them. To humanity, this may seem horrific in the fact of the unknown or that which is beyond us or out of our control. While the cults of Dagon, Cthulhu, etc., are depicted as malevolent, satanic, high magic, chaos organizations whose desire is to bring about the end of the world. To note, this is pretty ironic, since most of all apocalyptic religions reflect this, not just dharmic ones who expect Shiva, Kalima, or others to destroy and rebuild the world in some manner, be it metaphorical. This is something very much found in many pagan or Indo-European faiths, even via Zoroastrian concepts, the Norse Ragnarok, and Christian end times via revelations, though these are always marked by a cycle of life and hope via a rebirth. The doomsday occults that arose in the 19th century are always rather Christian in nature, aside from maybe the late Om Shinrikyo, though it did mix Christianity in a bit. The god that is the most supreme within his fictional world is that of Azathoth. Azathoth is an amorphous being that is rather indescribable. It is said his dreams are what create the reality everyone lives in, and that if he were to awaken, everything would come to an end or cease, as it all upheld by his cosmic will. All of the other outer gods are his creation and mental reflection, and thereby other creation is brought about from their efforts, being domains within a larger encompassing domain. Azathoth is kept asleep by other cosmic beings who play drums and flutes to maintain his constant state of slumber. While there is a cosmic horror aspect and a feeling of hopelessness to some of these depictions, and how Lovecraft writes them, one cannot say this being is evil, but more of a third position of balance. This interestingly reflects the Hindu concepts of Mahavishnu or Narayana, as well as Rudra Shiva. Mahavishnu Narayana is often described by some as the maintainer of the cosmos, who dreams of Brahma while he slumbers, and it's Brahma who creates our world. Though there are a multiverse of different Brahma and universes, this also reflects a Buddhist cosmology as well. Rudra Shiva is often seen as the destroyer who will burn away and purify the earth once it has gone too far from the cosmic order, or Rita, or Dharma. Thereby, the cycle of creation will start again. I don't know if Lovecraft was aware of this allegory or not, but he was rather well educated and did research on many things he wrote about, so there is a chance. Though most of his cosmic and metaphoric understandings seem to be influenced by Orientalism and that of Sufi orders. Though remember, the Sufi were heavily influenced by Platonism, yoga, and possibly Persian religion. Other gods of Lovecraft's mythos and cosmology include beings such as Yog-Sothoth, who is a cosmic outer god, who seems to be an influential progenitor of many gods and various people groups, as well as in his incarnations he is more of a neutral force, with his actions being seen more of evolutionary and not directly malignant, chaotic, or of order in nature. One has to remember, within Lovecraft's world, order doesn't mean good by default, nor does chaos mean evil. though he proposes more that the universe is generally chaotic, there is a flux between the two. A lot of dharmic and more ancient pagan worldviews across Eurasia reflect this balance and flux more than a hard dualism that we see in Zoroastrianism and Abrahamic faiths, though his ideas of chaos versus order were probably very much Greco-Roman influenced. It is said that Lovecraft wrote that during his childhood, he was fixated on the Greco-Roman pantheon and briefly accepted them as genuine expressions of divinity, foregoing his Christian upbringing. Lovecraft has said, "Religion itself is an absurdity and an anomaly, and paganism is acceptable only because it represents that purely orgiastic phase of religion farthest from reality." His usage of the word paganism here falls in line with the typical anti-Abrahamic religious view. However, as I have written elsewhere, I don't believe the human soul is capable of true atheism, and most are agnostic who are in rebellion against the Abrahamic faith, knowing there is a greater divinity and spirit out there and around them. His usage of orgiastic here is to mean carnal and primal, not just sexual. However, religiosity that isn't safe, sanitized, and extremely reserved is also presented within all non-Abrahamic faiths, with a balance between ecstasy and adherence to virtue. Lovecraft said, "Then the liberated old ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and reveal and enjoy themselves. All of the earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom." While I am not in agreement with those, possibly Lovecraft himself, who see the old gods, the pagan gods, as instruments of chaos, which would be the Christian and rather later Warhammer fiction-esque point of view, I do think we are in a rather artificial construct of enslavement that is against virtue and the true nature of man, and his potential to master himself and achieve greatness in the eyes of and in the name of the divine. Certain natural warfare and combat will be inevitable with this, but it won't be a fight regarding who has the blessings of the Abrahamic desert god, or the enforcement of worship of the artificial and unnatural sexual or racial god called equity and equality. Lovecraft said, "Though at times interested in reforms, notably prohibition, I have never tasted alcoholic liquor, I was inclined to be bored by ethical casuistry, since I believed conduct to be a matter of taste and breeding, with virtue, delicacy, and truthfulness as symbols of gentility. Of my word and honor, I was inordinately proud, and would permit no reflections to be cast upon them. I thought ethics too obvious and commonplace to be scientifically discussed, and considered philosophy solely in its relation to truth and beauty. I was, and still am, pagan to the core." One rather interesting note of influence is the Typhonian order, formerly the Typhonian Ordo Templi Orientis, TOTO, which is a UK-based self-initiatory magical organization that was a spin-off of the Golden Dawn and Thelema from Aleister Crowley. Was founded by British occultist Kenneth Grant in 1924. He died, I think, in 2011. But basically, he founded it, and he didn't get along with Crowley for a few things. They were like together in a lot of situations, and I think they worked really strongly together. He spun off and made his own group as sort of a chapter adjacent to some of Crowley's works, and then Crowley didn't think he could handle it. But after Crowley had died and a lot of other drama, he basically was unimpeded by Crowley's influence and could do his own thing. He created this group, which is still active today. And I'm not going to go in on what they believe or don't believe, because that's not a part of this and not a part of my direct faith or belief or anything related to what I believe. Despite that, I do like to research some occultic concepts. But it's interesting that a significant, though not central, aspect of the typhonian tradition involves Kenneth's interpretation of H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror fiction. Kenneth Grant viewed the Cthulhu mythos entities as more than just fictional constructs. His position was that they represented archetypal realities, possibly even symbolic representations of actual spiritual forces. Grant believed Lovecraft's works access the same primordial truths and cosmic mysteries explored by esoteric traditions. This synthesis is reflected in the Typhonian tradition, which blends thelemic principles with Lovecraftian themes, amongst other influences. Consequently, the Typhonian order uniquely bridges early 20th century esoteric practices and cosmic horror fiction. So this is probably why a lot of you may see a lot of people who are into occult things, who are into everything from Satanism to theistic Satanism to just in general the occult vibes or thelema or other things, seeing often in a modern approach, they'll see the Goetia demons, etc., as reflections of almost Jungian archetypes, much like some people try to see the Norse or Celto-Germanic or Greco-Roman gods as archetypes. But you'll see that they will take these archetypal concepts and also take all fiction that has been influenced by these gods, because we can say easily that Lovecraft was influenced by ancient paganism in many ways. They'll take that and say it's just a euphemism or an allegory or another word or another titles for the same gods, either in a psychological worldview of archetypes and inner human spirit and willpower, or in a spiritual worldview that these all reflect different understandings of the same cosmic entities, or a mixture of both. Now, I'm not going to get into this, that, or the other regarding them, but I do find it interesting that you'll see people taking the Cthulhu mythos and actually reflecting real chaos magical religion on that. The truth with these is that it is a reflection of actual proper concepts, being that both the Jungian model and a spiritual understanding is true. And that is also my approach. That is also the approach you'll see in a lot of Dharmic and Buddhist concepts and Vedic concepts, and you'll see in a lot of understandings of certain philosophers. Now, this goes in between the hard versus soft polytheism, which I personally believe there should be a mixture of the two. Now, this is not my beliefs that we're talking about here. This is this tradition, but it's interesting that this tradition, which of course is a newer tradition, mostly occultic base, was heavily influenced by Lovecraft, but that Lovecraft himself was probably influenced by Theosophy, Ariosophy, and other things that were contemporary to his time and understanding of what the occult or paganism may have been, as well as traditional classics of the Greco-Roman world, which he obviously took place in studying and learning. So to conclude here, I'll say, for influential, creative American writers who had semi-pagan themes and wrote characters worth remembering, I would say Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard were top tier. In the same vein of horror and psychology, analytical writing, or more dilemma, I would say their predecessor, Edgar Allan Poe, is amazing as well. When I was younger, these men inspired me to write. While I don't write fiction anymore, I may return to it in the future. However, I am very glad we have had men like this to express the world in a different and darker ways, to challenge how we think of the world and cosmos and how we perceive ourselves. Lovecraft said, "Wise men have interpreted dreams, and the gods have laughed." I hope you all enjoyed this little discussion on Lovecraft. Hammer and Vajra out.